going to start with the one question that everybody has been asking. I feel this whole time is the 2020 question. So, like the key question of 2020, yes, you can see my screen. That's amazing. So let's get started. My name is Zélia. As Brian just said, I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Virtusize here in Tokyo. I've worked in random places that you might have heard of, like Amazon and Deloitte Digital, who actually bought Mobiento a couple of years ago, Millennium Group, across different countries, starting from France, the smallest city ever, only known for Camembert, pretty much the only thing we've ever done, and moved around a little bit. Meanwhile, all that time, my job has been changing really weird titles all over, but basically I am a designer. And I feel that you guys all over today have heard a lot about design thinking. The term has been coming over and over again. And while this is really trendy, I like to describe it as making ideas kind of become tangible. That's really what my job is about today. It's about helping businesses kind of understand the needs of their customers and their users and make that into something that people can actually interact with. So during that talk today, I have 3 things I need to manage to achieve. The first one is to actually convince you that design and customer centricity are the most important things to run a business in 2020 and in the years to come. So that's my first goal. Second goal is going to be to give you really concrete tips to solve some of the most common problems when people are using design thinking, which you might be facing yourself if you're launching a startup, or if you're an entrepreneur, or if you're just starting to run a business, trying to care about the people you work for. And the third thing, which is probably the most important, I need to get you guys sufficiently excited so that at the end of this talk, you want to talk to me again so that I can tell you all about a Swedish warship from the 17th century, which I'm extremely excited about because it's a magnificent example of failed innovation. And I couldn't find the time to fit this in the 15 minutes of this talk. It's still a very exciting story. So let's get there. I do like to overpromise. So because we have so little time together today, I am going to try to oversell this presentation and tell you that you will, by the end of it, be able to think like a designer and solve any problem. I hope that this is enough to get you excited and want to listen to me for the next few minutes. So I'm assuming that all of you listening to this right now and having been through the previous talks have something in common. And that something in common is, I believe, the fact that you potentially have an idea. You have an idea for a business, you have a vision for a potential project, you have collaborations going, and you want to take that idea to something really concrete that you want to bring to the market, you want to bring to other people to do something great out of it. So I have great news for you. That idea pretty much has 4% chances of succeeding. Good job. It's a high chance. You have some stakes in there. You have 4% chances of succeeding over the next 10 years. 96% of these ideas will fail. And if you really specialize in innovation projects, then only 20% of those will actually manage to bring any sort of ROI, which is why probably everybody is kind of freaking out about this whole concept of entrepreneurship. It's difficult. And obviously, people have been trying to solve this forever. And in the previous talks that you've seen, again, I've heard the word design thinking being thrown around. And I guess this is because it's presented as the one-size-fits-all solution that kind of solves every single business problem anybody has ever had. That sounds amazing, right? So what is design thinking? I feel like we're talking a lot about it, but it's very rarely put in simple words that make it really clear what this is actually about. So design thinking is the art of understanding your customers. That's really the core center of the practice. That's the core idea. We want to understand the people we are doing things for. We want to understand our customers so that we can generate profitable business ideas. That's Also very important. We don't want to just create products and ideas for nothing. We want them to bring money back, which is a good thing. And last but certainly not least, this has to be done through a step-by-step approach that has been defined and over-defined. If you guys look into any sort of design thinking materials on the web, you will find dozens of books that explain the same thing over and over again on how supposedly you can approach these problems and tackle them. Why is everyone so excited about this? You might ask yourself. It's because the method itself is actually proven to be efficient and to bring money back. So the numbers kind of speak for themselves. I brought a couple here, like the companies that are customer-centric, they are 60% more profitable than others. Increasing customer experiences tend to increase revenue. So in this case, 5.7 times more than competitors and so on. Same thing, it will take you 2 seconds on Google to find even more numbers, because at the end of the day, it's only common sense that if you care enough about your customers, you will make good business. You don't need a design sprint book to tell you that, because it is quite obvious. And yet, there are people like me that kind of sell the method and preach the method and work with massive consulting firms to kind of explain this whole design thinking magic. So what is it all about concretely? It is a 5-step method, supposedly, that starts with, I think, what Nicholas has been talking earlier about, building empathy. So the whole idea here is that we're going to spend some time understanding the users, understanding the customers, understanding the employees, basically understanding everybody in the ecosystem of an idea or a product, and try to understand what their needs are. Then, based on that, we are going to try to define a problem. So what are those unmet needs, and how do we bring this as a problem that can actually be solved, which is, a good thing if we can put a framework around that. Supposedly at this stage, you have a good problem. So what happens next is you bring people together and they all generate ideas. So we call that a diverging phase. It's the moment where people take the time to produce as many solutions as possible to solve a business need or a customer problem. After that comes prototyping. So the idea in design thinking and customer centricity is that we're not launching massive things in one go. We are doing smaller things, smaller iterations that we can then test with the users and the customers. That's the basic method behind design thinking. So now at the beginning of this talk, I kind of promised you guys that during those 15 minutes, we would learn all about design thinking, and then you would be able to solve any problems. But given that I've already spent 6 minutes doing this, I have to kind of take back my offer, and we are going to try to think like a designer and solve maybe 5 problems in about 10 minutes, if that's okay with you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take you guys through pretty much the basic problems that usually arise when an entrepreneur is taking the design thinking process and tries to implement it. It's the basic challenges that I've seen over and over again in startups, in big corporations, everywhere, the things that you might actually be facing yourself and you might want to solve. So the first one, you're trying to empathize, right? You are trying to understand your customers' needs, which is completely understandable. And then what happens? Well, you're asking your customers what they want, which is actually a massive issue. Because you probably heard that fake quote from Henry Ford, who said, we did not say, but apparently somebody put those words in his mouth. If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for faster horses, which is probably very true. And the reason for that is a lot of the research that's been carried out by companies who want to use design thinking is done in the wrong way. So what usually happens when you tell people you need to understand your customers is that they're going to recruit some people who fit in the demographics they think they are targeting. They will pay those people to sit in a room And so just put yourself in that situation. You're sitting in a room, somebody's paying you, you're like having an interview where they're asking you questions about an idea, about a project, and you have about 45 minutes of your time to be spent in that room. What do you think you're doing? Well, you're probably answering their questions, right? And you kind of want to sound smart, and you also kind of want to make it sound like they spent their money wisely. So what you're doing is like you're slightly lying about your behavior. You're slightly lying about the idea. You're probably telling them that you kind of like it when you don't. And so basically everybody's lying to everybody and you don't really know what's going on there. So instead of recruiting users or recruiting customers and asking them what they want, what you might want to try and do is to actually observe what they need. So you will need to follow your customers around, not in a stalking way. You will need to observe the analytics of your products if you have a digital product, but you have to really look at people and listen to people in their actual natural habitat, rather than creating those fake research places where literally nobody will ever tell the truth. That's the key success factor for a good empathize phase, is to really observe and not just ask. So say you've done that, it's great. You've looked at a lot of people, you've understood their problems, and now you're trying to define what the problem is. And what usually happens at that stage is that a lot of people, when they're looking at the problem, they're already starting to think about solutions. And if we had more time, I would take 5 minutes to tell you a wonderful story about a guy I worked with once, where we were trying to solve the problem of people washing their hands in hospitals and not doing it enough, who decided that putting the equivalent of a pinball machine in the restroom was the actual solution during the define phase. But because we're not doing that, what I'm going to tell you is that at this stage, what you really have to do is falling in love with the problem, not with the solution. Because if you know exactly what you want, you're going to be extremely disappointed. The point of design thinking is not to define already what it is that you believe is the right thing to do. It's about like generating as many ideas as possible, but also asking other people how they would approach that problem. In design thinking, we're solving what are called wicked problems, and wicked problems are multidimensional, they're complex. If they were simple, somebody would have solved it already, obviously. So what you're doing here is to trying to really define those problems from many different perspectives, so that you have something that is more likely to be complex and multifaceted, and actually will give way to a lot of potential ideas, which is the goal of the next phase. So in the ideation phase, that's the point where normally people try to create a lot of ideas. And here you're going to tell me that the challenges that you think you might face are usually, how do I have ideas? How do I know they're good ideas? Which are obviously very, very difficult things. But those problems we could talk about for potentially 2 hours. So I wanted to bring something different to that part of the discussion. A challenge that you will face in Japan when it comes to creating ideas is that consensus is getting in the way. So in Japan, everybody has to agree and everyone is to be kept in the loop, kind of. And that's a bit difficult in this case, because if you have to have 10 stamps of approval on an idea before it moves forward, where you're kind of going to miss the opportunity to actually solve your customers' problems. So because a lot of the work of design thinking and customer centricity, especially for smaller companies, happens at a very small scale, what you might want to try, if you have the chance to already have a team, is to empower the people who already talk to the customers and give them free rein on how to solve the customer experience problems that they might be facing. It is very difficult to achieve in Japan, but it's also very, very powerful. Giving the power to people to actually make the experience of the customer or of the user better by themselves, by just telling them, okay, this is your area of freedom, just do this, you'll notice a complete increase in user satisfaction and in customer satisfaction. So very important to not get stuck behind consensus all the time, but make sure that people know that they have those pockets of freedom to actually do the right thing. Then Prototyping, also a very complex topic in Japan. Why is that, you may ask? Well, in Japan, very often, only the best will do, right? Perfectionism is critical here. The problem is, if you only do the best, you're not going to do much because you're never going to be happy. Most of the people are actually quite perfectionist. And so when we're looking at creating a lot of ideas that we put to the market really fast, well, let me tell you, some of them are going to be broken and they're not going to be great and they're not going to be perfect. But something that's really important when we approach design thinking in the real world and not in the theoretical, wonderful books that have been written about the topic is that done is much better than perfect. Because if it's not out there, it doesn't exist. And somebody else is doing it in your place. So you got to launch the damn thing and see what happens. That's the reality of practicing design thinking as a discipline. And then last but not least of the phases, you have the testing. And so in my experience working with entrepreneurs and startups, people usually have a little bit of a fool on the mountain kind of syndrome. So they think that when you are working with new business ideas, the most important thing is to look forward and never look backward. This is wrong in so many ways. When you are only looking forward, you are missing on all the learnings you might have from those tests you've done, from those things you've done wrong before, which again is one of the core principles of design thinking. Design thinking is about understanding previous experiences to build new ideas and repeat that cycle so that it becomes virtuous. So what people need to think about when they're practicing this, and again, very often as an issue in Japan, is two things. We've talked this morning about being an athlete and how that impacts entrepreneurship. Well, it's very much the same here. It is not a sprint. I know the Design Sprint is an amazingly popular book. I know people talk about sprinting all the time, but this is not a sprint. We're running a marathon. Business never stops. And so you kind of need to be able to keep that pace over time. You cannot always rush. You cannot always look forward. You have to do two things, refuel and reflect. So refuel is obviously taking breaks. That applies to life, obviously vacations and so on, but that also applies to product development, idea development. Sometimes you just need to stop for 2 weeks, else you're never going to get anywhere. And then reflect. The practice of running retrospectives in business development and in product development is critical. So after a project is over, looking at what went wrong, what went well, what we can improve for next time is important. What I usually miss from entrepreneurs is what comes after that, which is called a pre-mortem. So what you want to do is once you've parked that project, you take those findings, you take those learnings, and you bring them to the beginning of the next project, and you look at everything that might go wrong. And you already talk about this and you already plan for this, which is critical. So we're running out of time. And I would assume that at this stage in real life, you don't really know how to make this work for real. So my advice to try and make this work is to really talk to me about the Swedish worship question, because it's really important. Or you can talk to me about disrupting online fashion. We can also do that. And I can tell you a lot more about design thinking. And you can find me here. Thank you, everyone.